It's an interesting. I agree with that, and I think it's one of the challenges in education is how do you get uh, balanced representation. Like you have opportunities for kids to see people who teach who are like them. Um, and I know that there's a lot of chest thumping when it comes to diversity and things like that, but I think it's very valid in the sense that kids need to see people like them doing things that they do. I think of that Little Mermaid thing that came up recently.
Yeah, that was a mess. I mean, just the way people were complaining about that. I mean, it's a fictional character.
Yeah. One, I think it just shows how invested, there's like, it's almost like an subconscious bias towards what we're used to seeing. And I think that's kind of the default that these are the certain people that look this way, that do these things. And it goes across the board. And so we all stereotype at times, but I think at the end of the day, if someone's really, really upset about something like that, it's not really about us, so to speak. It's more reflection of them and their discomfort. And we experience it even in, as a mixed race marriage. My wife and I sometimes talk about that stuff. She's uncomfortable with some of the things that people talk about, when it comes to race, like, it's not my fault that, people had slaves and things like that. And we've
Right.
had in-depth, sometimes painful, but respectful conversations about what that means and what that looks like. And again, like with my diverse background, learning some of these issues, having a brother who was adopted too, and was from a completely different place. It's a real issue. So for me, my goal is, as an educator, is to just show kids different ways of looking at the world. And a lot of people think that I would, as a half black man, would go in and try to indoctrinate folks or try to convince them that these things are more important than other things. And my goal is to explain to kids, to teach them how to listen to people, to try to understand the world around them and understand that our perceptions do matter, right? That it is important to see all different kinds of people doing different kinds of things. And it doesn't matter whether it's pro basketball or somebody on stage. You want to see people that represent the whole world, not just one world.
I agree. Great point. So, what are some challenges that you see moving forward in terms of, education?
I think I was actually having a conversation with a colleague yesterday about how to inspire kids. I've moved schools from a Title I school to maybe I don't know how to say, maybe a little more comfortable neighborhood. And what I found is that a lot of the challenges the kids face are universal. It doesn't matter whether you
Right.
have a lot or a little. It's just a different set of needs, in terms, but kids still need love. They need support. They need encouragement. They need positive peers and safe environments to thrive. And, and everywhere I've taught, I've seen the same need. And it's probably a picture of the society as a whole that we've kind of lost touch with some of those connections to our past. And so going forward, we're trying to find new ways to engage kids and try to change that educational model so it appeals to kids and their skills and their strengths. Not everybody's going to be an accountant. Not everybody's going to be a physicist and there's no shame in going to a factory and putting in time, at the Shinola plant in Detroit. I grew up in an industrial area in Michigan where everybody had comfortable jobs building GM cars. And I watched what happened when my hometown died because GM and Fisher Body pulled all of their factories out of our town and took them to Ontario or to Mexico. And so
you get it.
I kind of, Lansing, Michigan was kind of like a microcosm of society. We grew up in a time in the 80s where there were all kinds of kids, but everybody had economic security. And so this neighborhood, our community thrived. And if I go to my reunion, there's love across the board for people that do everything from, like, I know the former city budget manager for the city of Baltimore, and Andrew Klein doing more community outreach instead of just continually giving people money for just because they need it, so outcomes based, much like education. We want people to understand and do their jobs well. So I just had a lot of people that I knew growing up, from a community that didn't have the racial issues that a lot of places had. And what we found when we went out into the world was that the race was a real thing. And so
right,
how do we address those things comfortably without me? But it's not always going to be comfortable, And so for me, my current placement, I'm a rarity. I'm a half black male in a school that, primarily, I mean, statistics don't lie. Almost, about 80% of teachers are white women. And
oh,
so
no,
there is a visceral notice and change when kids see me walking through the halls, and some of them don't know what to think about it. Some of them are like curious, and some of them will talk to you, but I make it a point to reach out and say, hey, what's up, good morning, to every single kid in the school, because they need to see that people are approachable no matter what they look like. And
right,
you know I've got that beard. So there are things like, I'm not a museum piece, but they're curious, and so it's an opportunity to start a
right.
conversation about what it's like. And I call this my COVID beard. I've grown it since COVID started, just a kind of representation of the arc of time, and it drives my wife crazy. She wants me to cut it because it's really long,
Good, man.
and it's all poofy on the end, and we're kind of having a disagreement because I'm like, I want to keep it growing, but she's like, it's messy, and people have been like, it's messy, you gotta clean up the edges, and I'm like, you're cutting off a part of me, it's
You're like Samson, but with a beard.
pretty much. I mean, and so, to kind of close that circle on what do we do different. I was talking to this woman that I teach with. I've known her because we've done some work through the committee, the language arts committee for the county, and reviewing books that some people didn't like, about uncomfortable topics. And so I was on the committee that kind of talked through that with the parent board and the school board and all different representatives from the community to kind of talk about those things. And we're always reflecting on our practice all the time about how can we get our kids to engage more? How can we get them more involved? How can they have more determination in what they learn and how they learn it? And so those are big ideas that not a lot of people want to talk about, because the biggest impact of COVID was socially, I believe. Socially and mental health were the biggest challenges for communities in general. I think it affected everybody in different ways, but it particularly affected kids, because not being at school for 18 months and not being around peers, being around the structure of school, as much as people say it's a laboratory for radicals. Kids need to be around kids, and we have kids and behavior problems and academic problems that exist now because they weren't in school. Regardless of how you feel about COVID and whether or not we should have been out of school, the fact is the kids are way behind developmentally, and so we have kids that are eighth graders.
I agree with that. Of course, you have some people who are still keeping their kids home or still schooling, and we can jump into this at like a different time, but or like a different episode. But just in terms of the whole homeschooling aspect, and something I did touch on with this previous interview that I did with the teacher a couple of years ago, was that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with people who are homeschooled. I mean, but I have met plenty of adults who have been homeschooled, and you can just tell that just in terms of their social development, it's different. It's like they didn't really get a chance to learn necessarily how to deal with conflict outside of the same people all the time, or like how to interact with new people. So me personally, I think when possible, now of course you come into situations where people may have medical issues and things like that, which may prohibit them from attending, a traditional brick and mortar. But, I think it's important just in terms of just being able to properly integrate into society, being able to deal with people who are your peers and people who are your elders and people from different backgrounds and things of the sort. Just my opinion.
Sure. And I understand it. I would tend to agree with you. I think that human interaction is a critical part of development,
We were teenage dreaming, baby girl, put me on the cover all around, turning up, down, up in the houses, making our own living house.